Hey everyone, and welcome back to another Mule Made Easy video. In this video, we're going to be going over part 2 of a two-part series covering the Mule 4 Java module. In part 1, we went over the new and invoke operations, and today, in part 2, we're going to be going over the invoke static and validate type operations. So let's get into it. Alright, so before we get too deep into the demo on invoke static and validate type, I want to briefly talk about the difference between your regular Java invoke operation and your Java invoke static operation. So with the regular Java invoke, we can call methods on an instance of a class. So once we've created an instance of tripler, for example by using new tripler, we can call these methods after we've created an instance of that class. Now, when we have something like a static method, which we have here in utils.java, we have the public static string format name method. We actually don't need an instance of a class in order to call that method. And this actually winds up lending itself really well to utility methods. As you can see here, I have this class named utils, and maybe this class would provide me a series of utilities that I use for formatting names or doing typical calculations that I'm using throughout my project. If you wanted to do them in Java, having these as static methods might be a great idea. On the other hand, you could probably do it in a data weave module instead. It really just depends on your comfort level and what you're looking for. So let's go ahead and check out how we would call this string format name method. But first let's look into it real quick. So we're passing it 3 parameters: first name, last name, middle name. The first thing we're doing is getting the first character of the middle name, and we're gonna call that middle initial, and then we're gonna format a name right here. And this is gonna output something like, for example, with my name, it would be last name, comma, first name, and then a middle initial and a period after that. So that's what that would output. Let's go ahead and save this and check out how we would actually call that. So we go over here into the palette and we're looking for Java. You'll notice that I have multiple instances of these. I believe this is because I actually in my workspace as a whole, I have 2 different versions of Mule 4. I have 4.1.3 and 4.1.4. In order to prevent yourself from getting mixed up if you run into something similar, just go ahead and hit the project text right here, and that will just give you the operations and connectors that are applicable to the project that you're currently working in this case a 4.1.3 project. So we want to drag invoke static over here. We're going to give it a better name. We're going to call it format name. For the class is just like what we did in the first video, part 1. So in this case, it's com.mme.api.utils. Notice that's a fully qualified class name. And the method in this case, if we go back to utils.java, is called format name. And it takes in 3 strings, format name. So remember, you need to specify these types so that Mule can determine which method to call if you've chosen to overload that method. All right, so for the args, we'll use an expression here, open up the curly braces. I'm gonna do a tab and we'll have first name. Again, I'm just gonna use my name for this. Last name, and finally middle name, just like Batman's butler. At least that's what my friends say. And we'll close that off. All right, before we exit out of that, actually, let's go ahead and set this to a variable. We'll call the variable formatted name, and we'll add a logger right after this. And call that name. Formatted name is vars.formatted name. All right, let's go ahead and, this should already be running actually. Let's see. There we go. So I'm going to trigger this off screen using Postman. I'm actually listening on localhost 8081 on path test 2. So I'm going to go ahead and trigger that. And let's see what we got here. So expected arguments, I see. So if you get something like that, these error messages are really good. If you just read them, it should point you right to where the error is. And if you read this very quickly, string first name, string last name, string middle name is what I provided. It's expecting string first name, string last name, string middle initial. And that's just because I had forgotten to change this earlier. So we're gonna actually, that's not right. I guess actually when I had changed this, it didn't refresh everything. So let's go ahead and stop the thing altogether and run this. I'd redo this video, but I think it's important that you see these kind of issues and how they can be dealt with. So in this case, I had auto restart on the instance. So whenever on the JVM, so whenever I saved a file that it was looking at, it would just reboot my Mule application. So what I did is I just actually canceled that. I took down the entire Mule application and I rebooted it. So let's see if that fixed it. I'm going to send this in one more time. There we go. So that fixed it. Great. So formatted name is Ernie, comma, Joshua A with a period afterwards. And that's exactly what we were looking for. So that's really it for Invoke Static. It's really good for utils, but more generally speaking, anytime you need to invoke a static method on a class, that's what you're going to use. You're not going to use invoke, so just keep that in mind. All right, so let's check out the validate type operation. First thing we're going to do is just create a new Mule flow. We'll drag an HTTP listener over here. We'll use the one we had earlier, and for the path, we'll listen on test 3 for this one. We're going to be working with 2 classes here. Both are extremely simple. So we have public class car, and that just has a toString method that we did an override on. And then we have Toyota Camry, and the important thing to note here is that Toyota Camry extends car. In other words, Toyota Camry is a subtype of car. If you don't understand how inheritance works or what a type and a subtype is, that's really outside the scope of this video, and I'd recommend that you check out some Java tutorials that go over that. So let's go back to our configuration XML. What we're going to do here is create a new instance of car. We don't have any args here. Let's go ahead and give this a better name. For the class, remember we need the fully qualified path class name. I keep doing that. So that's com.mme.api.car, and we're using the default constructor here, so we're not going to specify any method parameters. And for advanced, we're going to set the output of this operation to the car variable. Let's go ahead and save that, and we're going to bring in the validate type component. Now what we want to do here is validate that car, which is the output variable for this operator, is of type car. And we do that by specifying the type that we're checking against here, which is com.mme.api.car. The instance is the variable or the piece of data that we want to check. In this case is vars.car. And accept subtypes, we're going to set this to true right now, and I'll get back to how that works when we run this again. Now, if the validate type operation fails, we're not going to get to this logger. So what we're going to do here is say validation passed, and we'll put an exclamation point because we're excited about that. So let's go ahead and run this project. That's going to take a minute to boot up. But when it does, I'm going to go ahead and trigger this HTTP listener using Postman off screen. And if the types line up, we'll see this logger message. output in the console. All right, so I went ahead and sent that, and validation passed. Fantastic. So let me go ahead and make sure that this doesn't pass, for example. So let's say instead of looking for com mme API car, we're looking for a Java lang string. And let's go ahead and check out what kind of error message we could expect when we don't pass the validation. So I'm going to go ahead and kick this off and send it on the screen again. So we get a Java wrong instance class error type. The message is fantastic. Expected an instance of type Java lang string, but was com mme API car. So that's what you can expect if your validation fails. You'll notice that we also never got to this logger, because what happened is it threw an exception. It was looking for an error handler to handle it. It didn't find anything, so it just crashed the flow. So you'll notice that let's go back into the console real quick. The error type Java wrong instance class, maybe that's not something you want to send to your client as far as an error is concerned. You can always remap these errors using the error mapping and the validate type. You just add here, for example, we want to remap Java wrong instance class, and we want to map that to something like app invalid input, and that's all you do. Jose is coming out with a great video on how to do all this kind of exception mapping and exception handling using MuleForce try-catch blocks and things like that. So keep an eye out for that video. It might come out before this video, might come out after. I'm not sure, but it'll be soon. So make sure you check that out when it comes out. It'll be really good. All right, the next thing I want to do is show you how this accept subtypes box works, drop-down works. So I'm going to go ahead and set this back. We're going to be checking for com mme API car. And in this time, we actually won't accept subtypes. And we're going to change this to an instance of Toyota Camry. And the constructor here will be Toyota Camry as well. And let's just go ahead and, I'm sick of typing it. So let's just go ahead and we'll set that as a display name. Now remember, Toyota Camry is a subtype of car. So if we just look at this validate type component, since we're not accepting subtypes, we should see this crash. And let's see if that works. So it's already restarted, so let's kick it off. Great. And we get the same error message that we got before, or the same format for the error message. Expected an instance of type car, but was Toyota Camry. So this is great if you need kind of more fine-grained type validations. So you don't only care that it's a car, but it has to be a car. It can't be a more specific class like a Toyota Camry. So that's how you would handle something like that. And that wraps up the validate type operation. All right, so that wraps up today's video on the Mule 4 Java module, going over, validate type and invoke static. If you like the video, feel free to like the video. If you'd like to see some more content like this in the future, please subscribe. I'll see you next time.